We're live. Welcome back,
Right back
guys.
at you. Yeah, welcome back. It's been a little bit since we've recorded, and actually, it's been a little bit since I did my notes. So if I stumble through them, that's why. I apologize in advance.
Yeah, we had to take a week off because I needed to go see some really good bluegrass. So
Yeah,
apologies for the delay,
yeah.
but we're back at it.
Yes, we are. And my topic today, I think everybody will really enjoy. I'm doing another historical one like we did last week, but I'm doing ancient Egypt
Oh, I love
this
that.
week.
I
Yeah,
love
and I think
ancient Egypt.
I'm going to make it a two-parter. This one's going to be daily life a little bit more focused in ancient Egypt, like what was it actually like being like living through that time. And then next week, I'm going to focus more on the rulers of the time, maybe a little bit more of that sort of focus next week.
Well, it's fun to start with the daily life because I feel like the rulers get all of the attention.
I know, all
So
the attention, and I didn't want it to be that way. I wanted to give us a little variety and put you
yeah,
in the shoes of an ancient Egyptian. So that's what we're going to do today.
I love it.
So, like I said, I wanted to dive into a little bit more of what it was actually like to live in ancient Egypt, not necessarily focused as much around the pyramids and pharaohs, although we will get to that, but the actual people and their culture and the things that they were living day to day at the time. So, segment one, world they lived in. So, the success of ancient Egypt's civilizations came partly from its ability to adapt to the Nile's conditions for agriculture. So we know throughout history, cultures have centered around sources of water because that's where it's most productive to grow food. So that's where civilizations have kind of sprung up when we're talking about a long, long time ago. So the Nile often flooded, and the Egyptians were able to predict it and also control it a bit in order to irrigate the valley where they were growing crops, which made for a lot more fertile ground and a greater amount of production of those crops so that they could sustain their population there in the environment. And like we just talked about, its water sources at this time were not just something pretty or like something interesting to look at. Like this was literally a source of life for everybody. This is how you survived. So this area just naturally became a center for civilization. And so everything, food, trade, religion, calendar, orbited around this flood cycle of the Nile because that was this huge part of their life and their survival. So ancient Egypt, we consider from 3100 BCE to 32 BCE. So that's a really long period of time, almost 3,000 years that we're talking about is what we would consider ancient Egypt. And that's a longer time than between ancient Rome and today. So it's a very, very big period, essentially.
Right.
And ancient Egypt, so it emerged around that time, like we said, 3100 BCE, when Upper and Lower Egypt were united by Menes, Menes. And Upper Egypt is actually in the south and Lower Egypt is in the north, but it's named for the flow direction of the Nile and not the
that's funny.
compass direction.
Right. And did they even have compasses then? So they were just thinking,
no, I wouldn't think so. So they were just judging, I guess, in the direction that made the most sense to them.
That's
which
cool
is like
to think
up
about.
Or down. Yeah. And so
Directions
it was upper and
is
lower.
a social construct.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. It was just not something that like we would think of when we look at a map, but that's how it's made sense to them directionally. So little fun fact there for you. Society at this time was structured into strict classes. So the pharaohs on top, and then we have laborers at the bottom, enslaved people. And in between, there was levels of nobility, priests, scribes, craftsmen, and farmers. In general, there was not a lot of social mobility or your choice in a career. So essentially, you were born into whatever career you were going to have. You followed in your parents' footsteps. So of the different roles, we have the scribes. They were arguably some of the most important people in day-to-day life because they were writers educated in matters like math, religion, and cultural tradition. So a great deal of what historians know about Egyptian citizens at the time is due to their work. And they carefully wrote and documented on papyrus rolls, which I think we're all probably very familiar with, which were sheets of paper made from a marsh plant. And that's what they used essentially as their filing cabinets at the time. So newspapers, history books, all of that would have been on papyrus.
I love that. As a content professional, I like to think of myself as a scribe of the modern era.
Absolutely would say you are. Yes.
Yeah,
You fit
it's kind
that
of fun.
role. I absolutely hate the papyrus font. I have to
Oh,
tell you, it's
yeah.
the worst
It's
of the
a
fonts, I think,
oh,
but
yeah.
or one of the
Like that
worst.
and Comic Sans. They have the
Can't
worst
stand it.
reputations.
But at the time, important.
It was in
Yes. So the scribe class was pretty high ranking, like we said. They were important individuals to the culture. So they could understand and write in hieroglyphics, which was the ancient Egyptian language at the time. And they called it Medu Netjir, which is the words of the gods,
I didn't know
which
that.
is another word for hieroglyphics, which I never knew before.
Yeah.
One of the most fascinating events recorded was a workers' strike in Deir el Medina around 1150 BCE. And a state shortfall had resulted in delayed wages, and the royal artisans stopped working until the matter was addressed. So we have documentation of a workers' strike all the way from back then, which is really funny.
I love that.
And they won their strike as well. So it's the first successfully recorded labor strike in history.
Power to the people.
I know. And the individuals who built the pyramids were Egyptians who were compensated for their labor. The claim was that they were enslaved Hebrew workers, which is actually not supported by any literary or physical evidence at the time in Egypt's history, which is another
Yeah, I always
interesting
felt
fun
like
fact.
I had heard it was slaves, but I'm glad they got
Yeah.
paid for aliens.
Yes, which like I said, we'll get into some pyramids talks next week. So we
Awesome.
will get to that. I won't skip it. So a day in the life began at sunrise. Farmers would head to their fields while artisans and craftsmen would begin their daily tasks. A typical breakfast for an Egyptian at the time included bread, beer, and sometimes onions or fruit. Which I
Perfect.
feel like, yeah, pretty typical for what I would think of as like what they would eat at the time.
Yeah. And really, like, if you think about beer, it's a carb. So for a
Yeah.
breakfast, it makes sense. It's like a bagel as a
Right.
beverage.
And
And
I
then I
imagine that
like,
they weren't drinking a lot of water at the time because I don't know if we had good sources for purifying
yeah,
water.
that's
I
true.
think beer was
Yeah.
typically what people chose to drink.
And I'm just imagining them biting into onions, which I've always wanted to do, but it seems
Really?
intense. But I mean, I just love an onion.
Yeah. Maybe
So
if you
I could
chose
see
one of the
the
sweet onions, it wouldn't be
yeah, that
so
would be
bad.
good. Or like the
Yeah.
ones on what's it on Holes? Don't they like bite into like these like fermented onions or
Holes.
something with Shia LaBeouf?
Oh, in that movie. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, it's been so long since I've seen that.
so
I think
good.
I was probably I don't even know when that movie came out, so I might be lying here, but I think I was probably like 11. The
Yeah.
last time I saw
Oh,
that
it
movie has been
stands
a
the
long
test of
time.
time. It's a good one.
Yeah.
I think I've
I'll
watched
have to go
it
back and
like
watch
in the
it.
last couple years. Yeah.
Okay. I'll have to put it on my list to watch again. So the staple diet for them consisted of bread and beer. They supplemented with vegetables, like we said, such as onions or garlic, and then fruit was commonly dates or figs that they would eat. Wine and meat were enjoyed on feast days typically, and then upper classes could afford to indulge in that on a more regular basis. Beer wasn't a luxury, it was a staple because it was nutritious and calorie dense. And so, like you were saying, it's more hearty and more like a meal. So it was just considered a part of their like daily life and nutrition. Homes at the time were made of adobe bricks. So they're bricks that were made out of sun-dried mud. And windows and doors were covered with mats to keep flies out. And they had decorations just like we would in their homes. In terms of entertainment, Egyptians engaged in fishing, riverboating, hunting crocodiles and hippopotamuses, swimming, and early versions of team sports like rowing or hockey. Children had toys carved in the shapes of animals and balls, and they even had some types of board games like Senet and Hounds and Jackals.
I didn't know that at all. That's so fun.
Yeah. And it's fun. The Toledo Art Museum has some ancient, like Egyptian artifacts that are really cool to see. And I know I've
Mm-hmm.
seen before, not out of Egypt, but out of some South American countries. They have like little pigs toys that they have that are made out of clay. And there's a bunch of fun little ancient artifacts that you can look at online.
I love that. Like, some things never change in terms of playful
Mhm.
joy.
Yeah. So Senate, one of the board-like games that they had, meant passing, and it was the most popular board game similar to our modern backgammon.
Mm,
And what it represented was a soul's journey through the afterlife, and the boards were so beloved that they were placed in tombs so the deceased could keep playing forever in
I
the
love that.
afterlife. Yeah, isn't that cute?
Living their best afterlife.
Yeah, exactly. Life expectancy at the time was relatively low. Typically 30 to 40 years was what you would expect. And they had high child mortality rates, which again is not, I think, anything that anyone is surprised by at the time.
Right.
Those who survived childhood could sometimes live longer, especially among upper classes.
Makes sense.
But for people who were in hard labor, probably more difficult lifestyle and didn't live as long. So, looking in more closely at what a woman's daily life could look like in Egypt, women in ancient Egypt were regarded as equals in men as men in every aspect, really, except for occupation. So women were expected still to run their home and contributed to the stability of the culture as artisans, brewers, doctors, musicians, scribes, and many other jobs, sometimes even involve authority over men, but they were still expected to be the ones who were the stability at home. But women could own and run an estate or business even after they got married, and they could serve as executor of wills, witnesses on legal documents. They could sit on a jury, adopt children, and bring cases to court or even defend themselves, which is kind of unheard of, really, in a lot of cultures. Even if you look like not too far after this, if we're talking about medieval times, like
Right.
women just lost rights in so many different other
Yeah.
cultures so quickly, but there was a good sense of equality, I would say, even in
Right.
ancient Egypt.
And I feel like it was like that with the Sumerians and Babylonians too.
Okay.
It goes back to that conversation that we had about when they were a more prominent female goddesses, kind of,
Right.
that people worshipped and stuff, that women had a more respected role because they were seen as the givers of life before they realized men's roles.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool to see. Egypt was so progressive for women that women from other ancient civilizations often traveled there specifically for education. So, a Greek physician, Agnodice, was denied a medical education in Athens because of her sex. So then she studied in Egypt in 4th century BCE and then returned to her home city disguised as a man in order to practice medicine.
Classic.
Yeah. The first named physician in all of recorded history was actually an Egyptian woman, Rit Ta, circa 2700 BCE. So, political structure at the time. The political structure in ancient Egypt was a theocratic monarchy. From our episode on different types of governments, we know that theocratic is religion and then monarchy meaning a singular ruler. So that's what this was. The pharaoh was considered God.
Political ideology.
Yes, yes, yes. Political ideologies. Thank you. So religion and government were inseparable. The pharaoh was a divine power and also the absolute ruler at the time. And fun fact, the word pharaoh comes from the Egyptian para, which means great house, which is a reference to the royal palace. It didn't become a
Oh,
common title for a ruler until the New Kingdom period.
oh,
So they
interesting.
didn't actually call their pharaohs at the time.
That's funny.
Yeah. The vizier was the highest official after the pharaoh. So they were essentially like a prime minister if you're looking at England's monarchy now. All lesser supervisors and officials, such as tax collectors and scribes, reported to this vizier. And that particular position also sat in high court, which handled serious legal cases. So they were kind of like a Supreme Court judge slash prime minister in a way. There's a
Interesting.
lot going
Yeah.
on.
A little bit of parliament thrown in there.
Yeah. Yep. And Egypt was divided into provinces called nomes, and each government was ruled by a nomarch, which is, I just want to say monarch so bad. It's not.
Opposite.
Yep. And then this allowed local areas to be managed while central government maintained overall control. So kind of like how we have a federal and like state government structure, they had a similar sort
Right.
of political structure at the time. And pharaohs ruled by issuing edicts, often through their viziers. If the edict had implications outside of the palace walls, it was passed on to the nomarchs and the pharaoh's main representatives, or excuse me, the nomarchs who were the pharaoh's main representatives in the countryside. And these were also the people who were responsible for collecting taxes to then remit to the pharaoh. The priests were by far the most powerful in the palace, particularly the priest of Amun, who was the sun god and patron of the royal capital of Thebes. And eventually their power their power and influence was so strong that it rivaled the pharaohs, which became a point of tension in Egyptian history. Getting more into religion, the religion of ancient Egypt lasted for, like we said, the span of the culture, which is more than 3,000 years, and it was polytheistic, so they had a multitude of deities that they believed in and believed that they controlled different forces of nature. And there's actually 1,500 different deities that we know of. So
That's
a lot.
a lot. That's a
Yeah,
lot to
yeah.
keep
A
track of.
lot
I feel like they had to
to
be, like,
remember.
patrons of such specific things, instead of, like,
They
the
must
more
have been.
thematic stuff.
Yeah. So key gods, though, probably some of these you've heard of. Ra, I think that's the one that everybody is
Mhm.
probably aware of, the sun god. So he was the most powerful creator of the universe and renewed each day as the sun rose. Osiris, which is the god of afterlife and resurrection, and his myth of death and rebirth was the cornerstone of Egyptian spirituality. Isis, which is the goddess of magic and motherhood, which I feel like,
Queen.
have we covered her in something before?
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Yeah, we
don't
talked
remember
about
what, but
her in the Ancient Goddesses episode.
yes, that's right.
She is one of the groups of female goddesses from that time that all had kind of the similar story of motherhood. Um,
Yeah.
and then the, like, husband/son that would eventually
Weird
overtake
romantic
her.
relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's one of them.
Yep. So calling back to that, she used her magic to bring her murdered Osiris back to life. And without that act, the Egyptians believed that they would have never known what mummification was. So that's kind of like what they attribute their
Interesting.
practice of mummification to. Anubis was another one. So that one is the jackal-headed god that you always see
Yes.
on tombs. And that's because he was the god of mummification who guided souls through the afterlife. So that's why you
Right.
would always see it on tombs. Thoth, I think is how you say it. Maybe Thoth. It's Thoth. God of writing and wisdom, which was essentially the patron saint for the scribes that we talked about earlier.
Mhm.
And then Set, which is the god of chaos and storms. And he is the villain in the Osiris myth.
Mm.
Ma'at, the concept of the heart of everything, was an important principle. So the Egyptian universe centered around Ma'at, which is the key principles of truth, justice, and order. It was fixed and eternal, is what they believed, and without it, the world would fall apart. So it wasn't just a philosophy. She was also depicted as a goddess with an ostrich feather on her head, and the feather was a literal measuring stick for your soul after death. That was like the concept
That's
behind
so
that.
fun. It's like Pinocchio.
Yeah. I was like, this is very interesting. I just picture like the flapper girls with like the feathers or something, you
Yeah,
know what I mean? That's what
yeah.
it makes me think of.
What I feel like their theories and stories are so ornate, like, who would think of that, you know?
Yeah,
It's so fun.
it is fun. And I love that she was like the universe centered around her and it's a goddess. I
Yeah.
was like, that's kind of cool. So after death, the deceased's heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at by Osiris and Anubis. This is what they believed. And if the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul passed on to eternal life. If it was heavier, it was devoured by a monster called Emmet.
Emmett?
So Emmet. Yeah,
Oh,
Ammit.
I was thinking, like,
Not
Emmett, like,
Emmet.
it's like,
That
what a
would be
normal name.
hilarious.
Imagine, like, going through life and then only just learning that Emmett is, like, an
Yeah.
Egyptian name.
Ancient Egyptian name. That
Ignore
would be
me.
hilarious. Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure Emmet is probably like Old English or something. I don't
Oh,
know.
yeah,
Maybe
for
not.
sure.
That would be hilarious though. I mean, you could you could spell it A-M-M-I-T and then just say Emmet.
That's true.
Emmet.
Yeah.
So, Egyptian afterlife was imagined as a eternal continuation of life on Earth. So, like we were talking about earlier, they put the board games in the tombs with them because they believed that they were going to continue to live in this afterlife. Essentially, a very similar life to what they had on Earth. Some of the key principles throughout everything that the Egyptians believed all had to do with the principle of harmony. So, living well, being just, and if you do that, your heart will be light and you'll get to essentially do that forever. So, there's a
I
lot
like
of
the idea of
balance.
keeping, like, a light heart, though.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a
Kinda
cool principle.
cute. Yeah.
And that's pretty much all I have for us in terms of daily life. And like I said, next week we're going to get into more detail on pharaohs specifically and the pyramids, which I know everyone is excited to talk about.
Yeah, that'll be fun. This was fun, though. I mean, we probably learned this at some point in world history in 8th grade, but you think I remember that? No.
Yeah, there was a lot of it that I didn't know, especially
Yeah,
some of the fun facts and stuff I don't think I've ever heard
totally.
before.
Yeah. It's so interesting because you think about Egypt, like, in terms of what you see at the pyramids of, like, all sand
Hmm.
and things like that. So to think about the Nile and the area around that is to being, like, so fertile and, like, agriculture and stuff,
Yeah.
it's just, like, interesting to try to picture that dichotomy in my head.
Right. Yeah, it is interesting.
Well, I guess we'll get into what I'm talking about today. And chances are you've used this concept in everyday language when you're talking about something being like so hysterical, you can't stop laughing, or girl, calm down, you're being hysterical, which we don't love that version. So, yeah, we're going to talk about the history of hysteria and kind of what implications the concept has had on the way women are treated for certain ailments over time and how it carries through. And we still see it in just different forms today, which kind of sucks. But
Yeah, I forget what episode it was in, but I know we talked about that when I think maybe when we were talking about the Wolf series that we both read,
hmm
Wolf Den, and there was Pliny the Elder and like some of
yes.
his writings about health at the time. I think one of his words that he used specifically was like hysteria or like
Yeah.
though that concept of it was part of his medical documentation, which I thought was interesting.
And we'll get into it, but it was actually part of the like psychiatric diagnostic and statistical manual for people to actually like diagnose people with ailments
Yeah.
as recently as the 1900s. So
Wow.
so yeah,
That's
let's
crazy.
get into it. Starting back 4,000 years. So this has been a concept of oppression essentially for 4,000 years. The term hysteria comes directly from the ancient Greek word for uterus, which is hystera. So
Hmm.
from day one, the concept has been tied directly to womanhood. It's always been very specific to womanhood. Today, the term hysteria means some sort of ungovernable or uncontrollable emotional excess or a temporary state of overwhelm. So I think, recently there's been a lot of conversation about this quote unquote hysteria around the reaction to like the Epstein files and things like that. Noam
Mm,
Chomsky just kind of came out and called it hysteria or mass hysteria. And I think it's really interesting that we would put that label on an issue that talks about women's reaction to the abuse and detriment of women under the
yeah.
patriarchy.
Right.
So it's gross. But yeah, there's, aside from the societal implications, it's a very specific medical history that's really troubling. So when we think about hysteria in terms of symptoms, it could range from anything. So shortness of
Yeah.
breath, anxiety, insomnia, fainting, amnesia, paralysis, inability to speak, any kind of pain or spasms, vomiting, hallucinations, seizures, bizarre movements, infertility, being too tired, being a little grumpy, PMSing, all of it is just
Basically, just
chalked up
being
to
a live
hysteria.
human
Yeah.
woman was like,
Yes.
this is out of control.
Yeah, all of it's chopped up to quote unquote hysteria. Today, we know that these are things like epilepsy, autoimmune disease, grief, trauma, and totally normal hormone fluctuations that
Yeah.
we all experience to one degree or another. But we're going to go back to ancient Egypt for a minute and talk about their earliest theory. So they recorded the earliest description of hysteria. They didn't use that term at the time, but back in 1900 BCE, in ancient Egypt, they documented behavioral abnormalities in adult women on the Kahun Papyrus, which is one of the oldest medical texts. And their explanation was basically that the uterus could detach and wander around the body. And
Yeah.
that wandering uterus is what caused these weird behaviors. So their solution was to take the strong smelling mixture and either place it on their coos, or swallow it or smell it because they believed that the unpleasant smell would cause the uterus to just magically return to the abdomen.
Yes, I have definitely heard of the wandering uterus theory before.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I wonder if that played any part in smelling salts eventually, because it sounds like a really similar concept.
Yep, which is popular in the Victorian era.
Mhm.
Comes
Yes,
back
much
around.
later.
And I wonder too, with like the fact that it's kind of herbal based, that it probably did have positive effects on the woman.
Right, yeah,
Like we know that
depending on what
herbs are
was in
really
it.
good. Right, exactly. So we know that like some herbs can be really helpful with your period and things like that. Like you drink raspberry tea as it's kind of coming to lessen cramps, those kinds of things. And so I would be interested to figure out like what those herbs actually were.
Oh, yeah, that would be fascinating.
So, this kind of theory became popular and was then passed over to the ancient Greeks. So, they really subscribed to the wandering uterus theory and integrated it in their own medical practice. And then in 5th century BC, hysteria gets its name courtesy of Hippocrates. Also, kind of expanded the definition and included a unwillingness or inability to bear children or the refusal to marry. So,
Interesting.
those are some new quote unquote symptoms of
Again,
hysteria
being
was
a
just
alive human woman.
being a woman with agency over her body who spends
Yeah.
time who she wants to with is clearly hysterical.
It's so interesting. I mean, we talk about this all the time, how like everything in history ties together. But talking like when we talked about the marriage episode and how that stability in society was so vital that they
Mhm.
created marriage essentially to make sure that everybody kind of stayed in their place and everybody like that role was being fulfilled essentially, which just ties back to like this theory of it's really important to make sure that we make our women want to get married and have children because we need that for society. So we're going to tell you that there's something wrong with you if you don't want to do that.
It's almost like it's systematic oppression.
Almost like that. Wow, I've never thought of that before.
Yeah. So naturally the best treatment for this particular version of hysteria is to get married and have children, which
Mm. Solves
we're gonna
everyone's
we're gonna go
problems.
ahead and guess that that was all forced.
Yeah.
Moving on to ancient Rome, they still did believe that it was an issue of the womb, so still just applicable to women, but they dropped the wandering part of the theory in favor of the idea of a disease of the womb or a
Mm.
disruption in reproduction. So anytime there was like a miscarriage or people hit menopause or any kind of, disruption, you skip a period or something, it would trigger the hysteria condition, which we know is true, technically, because there is a lot of hormone changes that come with miscarriages, that come with menopause,
Right.
premenopause. If you're skipping your period, there's something wrong with your hormones, which, as we
Uh-huh.
know, controls pretty much everything.
Right.
So it's like sometimes they get a little closer to the point,
Yeah.
but they're still missing it a little bit. Then in the Middle Ages, so like between the 5th and 13th centuries, we see the rise of Christianity in Western Europe, which obviously definitely transforms how this is all understood. So we have St. Augustine writing about how human suffering was the result of sin. And therefore, hysteria had to be too. So now hysteria is a moral issue. It starts to become framed as some sort of satanic possession. Doctors became replaced by priests, and the church would prescribe prayer, amulets, and exorcisms to treat these women experiencing hysteria. Thomas Aquinas later doubled down on this theory in the 13th century with his Summa Theologica writing. He drew on Aristotle's assertion that a woman is a failed man, and he claimed that their inferiority was a consequence of sin and their susceptibility to hysteria was evidence of defective nature. You can't make this stuff. I have like reverse chills right now. It's
Mm.
what? Active? We literally make life, guys. Hello.
Yep.
Come on. I guess not these
Which
ladies.
actually,
That's their flaw.
now we sort of know technically it's not that men are the default and women are defective. Every fetus is originally a woman, and then you develop your man parts.
Not only that, but we also, recent studies have shown like the health of the man's sperm is determining everything.
Yeah.
It's not the woman. So
Right.
he also wrote that some old women were evil-minded and could harm children with a simple gaze, and that demons interacted through witches with their eyes. So, as one can guess, early groundwork for the witch trials.
Yes, that sounds like it.
Some semi-shining lights during this time were two of the first female physicians in the space. So among these idiots trying to make sense of the female body, we actually have two females come into play. So we have Trota de Ruggiero, or Ruggiero, is considered to be the first female physician in Christian Europe and one of the first gynecologists.
Oh, wow.
She saw hysteria as a medical condition and prescribed more practical remedies and herbs like mint and things like that. So getting closer to like real herbs that are actually helpful for the female body, peppermint being one of
Right.
them. So she kind of, really recognized that something was going on medically here and actually trying to treat it instead of saying that women are defective and evil. Then there was Hildegard of Bingen, and we talked about her in Ancient Apothecaries because she, again, was one of like the
Yeah.
herbalists and medical folks in the 12th century. So she was a saint too, so she straddled the line of science and faith. She unfortunately did agree with Hippocrates that hysteria was like physiological, but broke with kind of the more dominant narrative at the time. So she argued that both men and women share the responsibility for original sin and that both can suffer from hysteria, which was, radical and kind of probably dangerous at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And even now we know men's hormones fluctuate too. It's
Totally.
not just women's,
Just in the
so
day.
they also have their own types of cycles. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And we'll touch on this later, but Sigmund Freud kind of brings that back to the forefront later on. So then we get into the Renaissance and the Salem witch trials era. So during the Renaissance, women diagnosed with hysteria started getting treated by doctors again. Thank God. Actually, excuse me, I just misread my notes. We're not there yet. We're not back to doctors yet.
Oh no.
We're moving past doctors. We're moving past the church. We're moving to legal trials, the witch trials.
Of course.
So, these women experiencing these symptoms were being interrogated, tortured, exercised, and executed for as the treatment, essentially, for hysteria. They're like, we're not dealing with this anymore. Let's just kill them. They're evil. They're witches.
Yeah.
So, the Salem witch trials is technically considered a mass hysteria event. So, it began when Tituba from Barbados came and she was kind of engaging in fortune telling, and all of these girls around town started just acting really weird, kind of staring off, making odd noises and jumps and sudden movements and all of that stuff that kind of caught like wildfire in terms of their behavior.
Yeah.
So, 19 people were hanged, over 100 detained. So the question is, were the women experiencing mass hysteria, or were the townsmen prosecuting them experiencing the mass hysteria?
Right.
Maybe both. We don't know.
I think there was a little bit of both in that. I think some people, like the original people who started it, the young girls essentially, were probably acting hysterical, quote unquote. And then they were like, wait a second. we can just get rid of everyone we don't like with this
Totally.
excuse, and then it just spread from there.
Exactly. And let's remember that these are young girls who are probably
Right.
going through puberty.
Yes, and
So
probably,
they're gonna act weird.
this, like, 1600s of it all were really, really bored, and they're
Yeah,
children, you know? So,
exactly. I mean, I was a weirdo at that age, so like
yeah.
whatever.
I mean,
I'm
who among us has
a
not done
witch
something for
today,
attention at
so
some time in our
yeah.
childhood?
Exactly. These are children, guys. Calm down.
Mhm.
So we go through the witch trials, all of that, and we do eventually make it back to the doctors. So, towards like the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, physicians began reclaiming the treatment of hysteria, arguing that it was indeed a medical condition and not a moral or supernatural issue. So, running through now we'll get into like a couple of different doctors during this time who have tried to make sense in different ways and just kind of updated the concept throughout the years. So there was a French physician named Charles Lepoix who argued that hysteria was actually an issue of the brain and not the uterus. So
Mm,
again, we're taking it off of womanhood. So this is
right.
like the first time in, 2000 years that they're thinking in the right direction here. Meanwhile, Rene Descartes and an English anatomist, Thomas Willis, built upon this, linking it to the brain and nervous system functioning. And again, I think this is in some ways accurate for some people because we see autoimmune diseases today centered and stemming from dysregulation to the nervous system. And so, that causes brain fog, fatigue, emotional swings, things like that that could be seen in that day and time as hysteria.
Right.
1680, there was an English physician named Thomas Sydenham who published a dissertation on hysterical affections. And it was the first text to acknowledge that hysterical symptoms may be mimicking other diseases. And so because it's not saying that it is another disease, it's saying it can mimic it. And so this is where the concept of
Okay.
psychosomatic illness comes in, where that
Interesting.
diagnosis is of, oh, honey, it's all in your head.
So it's not that he's saying that these episodes of hysteria are an illness. He's saying that it might look like somebody's ill, but actually they're just crazy.
Yeah, they're just making it up. It's all in their head.
Interesting. Okay.
So again, getting towards the point and not getting there. And this is definitely something that shows up today. My sister, she has dysautonomia, so she has like the trifecta of POTS, which is like a heart issue, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is like a tissue disorder that causes a lot of pain and weak joints, and then mast cell activation, which is I also have, which is kind of the uncontrollable allergic attacks. And it took her 10 years to get diagnosed, and it started in high school with issues and early college, and they would just say, she's just anxious. It's all in her head.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. So keeping moving in 1748, we have another French physician named Joseph Rollin. He describes hysteria as caused by the foul air of big cities and unruly social life, which is likely where we get that prescription of sending a woman out to the sea to get some fresh
Yeah.
air, which I am
That
for.
I'm always for going to the sea.
Yeah.
That I think was also a lot of their reasoning behind rising crime levels
Mm-hmm.
was like the bad air, the bad environment, you know?
Right.
And
Yeah. Because it is. I mean, I wonder, that would be an interesting study if anybody's ever done one to actually see what like bad air does to your brain. I'm sure there are
hmm,
like environmental advocates and stuff like that.
yeah, chemicals.
Mhm.
I'm sure there probably is some, although I don't know if
Yeah.
it's the leading cause of like crime.
Mhm. Yeah. He also said that women were at risk for laziness and irritability, which is where we get that like the lady of malaise,
Yeah,
Um this whole,
the
whole
delicate
conversation.
constitution.
Yeah. And this whole conversation actually also reminds me, and it's comes a little later in the 80s, I think it's like 92, is the yellow wallpaper. If you guys have ever read that in English literature,
No.
it's really good. I recommend it.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
it's basically a woman in this situation, like she's acting hysterical, and the prescription for her is to go and rest in this house or whatever. And so essentially she gets like locked in an attic and loses her mind.
Okay.
So, highly recommend. It's a really good one.
That sounds really good. I'm gonna have to read that.
Yeah. And I hope I just, like, paraphrase that the right way. I'm pretty sure she, like, can't leave. Anyway, um, then getting into some of the Victorian treatments, and this is where things get really interesting. So we did touch on smelling salts, and that is one of
Yeah.
them because, this is when, like, women were, like, fainting a lot or being,
Mhm.
lethargic and things like that. So, they did a little bit subscribe to the wandering womb here still. So that's kind of where they would use that. But the really interesting turn is a treatment originated by a Swedish army major who used to perform a similar massage on soldiers that were having issues with their behind. So it became called a uterine massage. So the technique was adapted from more of an anal massage for these soldiers who I guess had injuries.
Yeah, which is I'm like, "What injuries are we talking
I
about?"
know.
I'm
Well,
having a hard
I
time
think the
figuring
name is
that out.
they called it like a prolapsed anus, and I don't really know what
Okay.
causes that.
Alright.
Not a doctor. Not gonna look it up because I focus on women's health.
Rather not. Hard pass.
So anyway, whatever they were doing in Sweden, they adapted it for women for a lot of conditions. So not just hysteria, they did it for people who had tilted uteruses, which I have, and then people who have nymphomania. So
Classic.
essentially, one hand is placed on the abdomen outside, the other one is inserted internally, and the massage was performed until there was what was called a paroxysmal convulsion, aka an orgasm.
I was wondering if we were gonna talk about this
So
today.
honestly, the best treatment yet for this ailment. So single women who didn't have husbands would actually go to midwives to take care of it. This is kind of what spurred like vibrators. Well, I guess they were
Interesting. Okay.
just not vibrating at the time, but where
Yeah.
that kind of concept came from. So that's where things start to get interesting. Similarly, in the same vein, someone also came up with the idea that male semen had healing properties. So sex was also prescribed. So they got
Okay.
tired. What I'm hearing is they got tired of pleasuring the woman without getting
They're like,
anything
"This
back
is too
and
much
decided,
work."
no, we need something
Yes.
back for this. And so
Right.
semen is healing, apparently.
Very interesting. I think it's so funny that that was, like, a medical procedure and normal, and as
I know.
even back in the Victorian time, women being affectionate and, like, kissing other women was just that was something you just did, that was normal,
Yeah.
and considered, like, practice for getting married. But then if you skip forward 50, 60, 70 years, then it's, like,
Hmm.
so conservative, like, nobody should be having sex outside of marriage, like, it's very it shifted so much.
Yeah, but that's really American culture. We know that Europe,
Yeah.
we know that Brazil, like they're more nudity, free love,
Right,
all of
right.
that stuff. And I mean, this is not the topic today, but like thanks to evangelism, and like that specific brand of church, which has really changed and moved the conservative needle for all other
Mhm.
denominations.
Yeah, yeah, I guess the thing that I just find interesting is that even the Victorians maybe were more spiritual combined with
Hmm.
their religion, but still like a very religious period in history. And
Right.
then it's just such a different type of religion in the United States. It's just
Exactly.
interesting.
And that's why I still think, like, I like the idea of, like, being Catholic because they are a little bit more spiritual. They're a little woo-woo. They think about saints, they
Yeah.
think about amulets, they smoke things
There's
or
a lot of
whatever.
smoke.
It's a lot of smoke. So, yeah, I'm like, at least they're a little weird like that still.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what we're campaigning on. Catholics, a little weird.
Catholics are a little weird and we love it. There's been a side conversation, we'll get into it another time, but like about people who are converting to Catholicism, like bringing their
Yeah.
like other denominations into it and like ruining
Yeah.
it for everyone.
That's so funny.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of random commentary on that lately. Anyway, back to hysteria. In 1859, there was a French physician named Paul Briquet. who conducted 430 case studies of hysteria patients over the course of 10 years and redefined it as a chronic syndrome with many unexplained symptoms across the body's organ systems. So this is a step towards autoimmune disease, I think, in a
Yeah.
lot of ways. And realizing that it's systemic, because even if it's not an autoimmune disease and it's a hormone issue, your hormones affect your allergy system. They affect your digestive system. They affect
Mhm.
everything. So it is truly systemic. So great progress there. Jean-Martin Charcot studied women in a French asylum and used hypnosis as a treatment for hysteria. And he was actually the first to argue that it could be caused by social conditions women lived under, and coined the term or used the term patriarchy.
Interesting. What year was that? What,
I
like,
don't
general
have the
time
year
period?
actually,
Okay.
but it is in 19th century, so the 80s.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. And so unfortunately, while these last two guys were kind of like two steps forward, our dear friend Sigmund Freud comes into the picture with his interesting takes.
Is penis envy?
His penis envy, that's exactly what it is. So he believed that women experienced hysteria because they were unable to reconcile the fact that they don't have a penis. Um, and so his recommendation to solve this was to marry a man or give birth to a man because you have so much control over the gender, unless you're doing IVF. Like, what?
Yeah. And then even then, I think only in certain scenarios do you get to, like, choose.
Yeah,
It's more like
exactly.
they just put a bunch of babies there and hope that one sticks.
Right. One positive contribution he did make, though, was backing up the claim that men could maybe have hysteria too, primarily
Mm.
framing it around soldiers, which is really just post traumatic stress syndrome.
Right. Right.
That term just was not used at the time.
Yeah, what did they called it, like, shell shock.
Yes.
I don't know
Yes.
if they still called it that during Freud's time. That I think was, like, the earliest
Mm-hmm.
period during, like, after World War One where they
Yeah.
started recognizing it more.
Exactly. So I mentioned earlier that at one time hysteria was formally included in the American Psychiatric Association's diagnostic manual for mental disorders. So that was in 1968 that it was began to be considered a mental disorder, and it stayed there until 1980. After there was
Wow.
kind of a decline in diagnosis, and then this wave of like actual psychiatric issues being identified. So during this time is where we kind of learned about epilepsy and autoimmune disease and PTSD and depression, anxiety, all that kind of stuff. So they were able to kind of
Yeah.
split hysteria into these other buckets. But unfortunately, removing them from the diagnostic manual doesn't remove misogyny from the medical office. So there is a woman, a doctor named Mary Claire Haver, and I want to say this story was fairly recent. I think you can go find it on a Substack, so we'll link it. But she's a women's health physician, and kind of early on in her career, she was working and doing rounds with a male attending doctor. There was a woman who came in who likely was experiencing perimenopause, complaining about multiple symptoms of pain and mood disorder and lack of sleep and all of that kind of stuff. And he kind of like chuckles to himself and he's like, well, what you got here is a WW. And she was like, why? He was like, don't put this on her chart, but this is a whiny woman. And essentially just said to placate her and kind of send her on her way.
Yeah.
So the idea that, again, that there's these psychosomatic symptoms that are just all in her head and
Right.
there's no like studies or research to refer to it because it's never been invested in is not
Yeah.
a good reason to say that there's nothing wrong with you.
Right. Even I mean, how in up until I think it's getting better, but up until recently, like drug trials, they've only done
Yep.
on men, you know? So there's just
Right.
so much of a gap in research.
Drug
It's kind of crazy.
trials, these study diagnostic criteria. Like when I
Mm,
got diagnosed with ADHD, we know that they miss ADHD in women because it looks completely different to the male
right.
version.
Yeah.
We're not like moving all the time and we're not like, you know, making as many more like physical symptoms and
Right.
signs as a male. Like I will tear up tiny pieces of paper and you can barely see me moving, but my brain is going a mile a minute and my hands are doing something else. And like, it's just not
Mhm.
obvious. And
Right.
I overcompensate at school because, I do like 3 rounds of notes to probably accomplish something that other people are just reading once and getting right. And things like that. It was a lot more invisible because it
Mm.
wasn't in the manual.
Yeah.
We've even found ways to treat men's erectile dysfunction faster than PCOS or endometriosis, which is a direct detriment on reproduction that everybody appears to care about, but is doing nothing about.
Right.
So,
Yep.
yeah, the rationale is that has been historically that the female hormone cycle was just too complicated and nuanced in terms of what it causes the body to do in reaction to these
Yeah.
diseases, that it was too expensive or too hard to include in research.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's getting a little better,
It is.
but even just the fact that it's taken us I mean, we're talking about this starting in ancient Egypt till maybe the 80s when you
Right.
said they took hysteria out of the diagnostic manual, essentially. So
Mhm.
that's a long period of time. If we've been talking more about women's health and actually diagnosing women for very, very, very short period of time in the span of total
Yeah.
history.
And I mean, like, they did start fighting in favor of it in the suffrage movement, and then again kind of
Right.
picked up in, like, the 70s and 80s, and I feel like it's now coming back around. And I think largely, like, I don't know if you use any of, like, the period tracking apps or things like that. A lot of those are
Mhm.
female-led.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, well, they're not gonna do it, so now we have to do it ourselves,
Right.
and
Yeah.
I love that. There's always, like, the issue with data and stuff, and so you wanna choose a trustworthy one. But yeah, like, it's starting to come around, but I'll just touch on, like, one more couple more stats just to really bring it home in terms of how it affects us today. I think, the biggest research gap is also outside of hormones is the autoimmune space. Women make up approximately 80% of autoimmune patients. So,
Mm.
like conditions like lupus, fibromyalgia, Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, dysautonomia, all caused by very different things and really nuanced, but they do have so many kind of crossover symptoms at the same time that, I'm not going to lie that it's not hard to figure out for sure, but, you have
Right.
to go through 5 different diagnoses to really understand. And then even then you're not actually like fixing it. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know whether, like, mine mast cell activation syndrome is genetic. It probably is, considering my sister has it and other family members have signs of it. Um,
Right.
but I also have learned on my own time, not because a doctor taught me, that it is tied to my hormones. Like, I can tell because it's tied to my cycle. When my estrogen is up, it goes up. And so, again, it goes back to hormones, but we can't understand how to really and truly balance the hormones. You can seed cycle, you can take progesterone, but it's so hard to get the information that you need and the treatment that you need to actually do
Yeah.
something about it. My friend had like exploding cysts on her ovaries for over a
Mm.
year before they would operate on her.
Jeez.
That's like hospitalization level pain, and they're not going to
Right.
work on
Yeah.
it
Oof.
immediately. Imagine Forrest went in with a gallbladder and he was under the knife within 3 hours. Like, come on, guys.
Yep.
Women spend an average of 4.6 years and see an average of 5 doctors to get the right diagnosis. And they're more
Wow.
likely to be told that they have anxiety or depression or stress. And at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it's anxiety, depression, and mostly stress that cause a lot of the autoimmune disease because the women are carrying so much weight, just like in ancient Egypt. Not only are they taking care of the household, but they're trying to run governments and, do
Mhm.
research to save women's lives.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, while hysteria has been removed from the medical space, it's still very much alive in medical offices. And we use that term a lot in our daily conversation when we're talking about something uncontrollable.
Yeah.
So the next time you go to use it, remember what you're saying, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Unless it's
Yeah.
hysterical
It's
laughing, in which case I'm
frustrating.
for it.
It's frustrating. It makes me angry, and I feel for anybody who's suffering and isn't getting a diagnosis or isn't getting listened to or believed. So, I
Yeah.
guess it feels frustrating and like hopeless, but it's not in your head, like if you're struggling with something, keep doing what you can. We believe you. I don't know
Yeah.
what else to say other
And
than
go
that.
see a female doctor.
Yeah, yeah,
They're not all
right.
perfect, but because, there's still old school thought, but I only see females now.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, thank you for bringing up this topic and teaching
yeah,
me so much about it. It's interesting,
totally. It is
not a
really
little
interesting and
depressing.
got a little riled up, so excuse me there. Sorry that you'll have to change the levels on my audio, but
It's okay. We can do it all in post.
yep, yep. All
Well,
right,
thank you
y'all.
guys for joining us. Yeah, as usual, if you like today's episode, you want to subscribe, we know we skipped a week, but we're typically here every 2 weeks with a new topic for you. Come back for part 2 of ancient Egypt and Kelly's topic for next week, which may make us just as angry. Well, I guess we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe I'll do a little whimsy next time to balance this out.
Maybe, yeah. It's a dichotomy here. You
Yeah,
never know.
there's really no in between, but
No, but join us then, and we'll talk to you next time.
okay, bye.
Bye.